unless you're working for a very sophisticated general counsel or inside counsel at a specific corporate client, how often do people say, man, I read your case citation. You really did a number in that case. Your brief was awesome.
Are you ready to make your law firm a profit-generating machine that will free up your time and skyrocket your impact? With more than 2 decades of business growth experience and having proven that you can be successful while prioritizing your family and your impact, introducing the Profit with Law podcast. I am your host, the creator of the Firm Differentiator 10X Effect, Moshe Amsel. Well, hello and welcome to another amazing guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and I have a treat for you. Why? Because everybody loves stories, and we're going to be talking all about stories today. So I'm not going to ruin the suspense. I'll let you sit there for a little bit. Keep doing your run, whatever it is that you're doing. Stay in the shower, keep driving in traffic. But we've got a great guest that's going to be talking all about storytelling for your firm. And there's no better person to be doing that than Paul Furiga. Paul Furiga is the president and chief storyteller of WordWrite. 2 decades in journalism first shaped Paul's storytelling skills. His storyteller's curiosity about the why behind every organization's story and his desire to share those stories led Paul to found WordWrite, and more recently led him to write Finding Your Capital S Story, Why Your Story Drives Your Brand, now available on Amazon. So we've got a published author, owner of a PR firm specializing in law firms, WordWrite, who is here giving us of his time to be able to tell us how to find your capital S story and why that's important. I think that's going to be the most important thing for us to cover right at the beginning is why should you even care? Why should you listen to this episode? So I'm excited to have Paul on here, and I'm going to bring him on in just a moment. But before I do that, I just want to let you know we at Profit with Law have taken our coaches' calendars and opened up just a handful of spots to offer a free coaching session to somebody who needs it. Okay. Now, how do you know if you need it? Well, if you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling like you're treading water or drowning, you're not getting to where you want to go. Owning your business is more like working really hard for the same paycheck you had before. If any of those things are happening to you, then you definitely want to have a coaching session with one of our coaches where they'll help you create some clarity around what it is that you want and what it is it going to take to get there so that you can finally get past this, start moving forward, and start to experience the rapid growth that's possible when you know what to do, when you know what's broken. So if you want to take advantage of one of those free slots, and the quantity is limited, so you want to make sure you grab one, go to profitwithlaw.com/free coaching, profitwithlaw.com/free coaching. We'll link that up in the show notes as well. I'm going to bring Paul on in just a moment. And I really, I just had a conversation with Paul in the green room before we started. What's the green room? That's where the speaker sits and talks before they get on stage, right? And I really like him. I mean, he's just very personable. We just met, and I feel like we've known each other for years, connected really well. So I'm excited to share him with you. Paul, welcome to the show.
Moshe, thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here with you and your audience. Thanks.
You're very welcome. Paul, what I do when I start is I ask the same question of every guest. So if you listen to any of the shows, you already know this.
Yes.
Our people are out there. They want to know, who the heck is this guy? I never heard of him. Right. He's a published author. He owns WordWrite. Never heard of them either. Tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you come from? How did you get into this? And give us the broad strokes of your story. You're a capital S. Tell us a little bit about that.
Once upon a time, in a city far, far away, a young boy thought he would become a famous musician. He picked an instrument that few people notice, called the tuba. He was actually pretty good at it, and he studied with somebody in the symphony. But lo and behold, before he went off to college, his parents had this conversation with him about what it would be like to live a life of poverty if he chose to be a musician. So he fixed that. he instead decided that he would enter the lucrative profession of newspaper journalism. Pause for the laugh. So I was a journalist for 20 years. I covered everything from murders to the White House. I figured it out. Moshe, over 20 years, I wrote 10,000 stories and edited another 10,000. So, that's a lot of beginnings, middles, and ends, right? So I was with people in the best times of their lives and in the worst times of their lives. I really came to understand storytelling. As things started to change in journalism, and I started looking for how to leverage my career, I wound up working at Ketchum Public Relations, which is the 5th largest PR firm in the world. And that was like getting an advanced degree in public relations. And I brought my storytelling skills to the agency and worked with clients ranging from Alcoa to Bridgestone, Firestone, Delta Airlines, FedEx. And then about 20 years ago, I decided to take those skills out on my own, and I created WordWrite. From the very beginning, everything that I just shared about storytelling has been a foundational principle. And one of the things that's true about our firm, we love folks who are engaged in providing complex services, because the more complex your story, the more interesting it is to me and my team to tease that out in a way that your clients and prospects understand the value of what you do and that they're willing to hire you. And wow, law firms, how much more complex can you get? So we love lawyers and we love law firms.
I love it, Paul. I love your story. Although I was hoping that you might have gone back to being a tuba player at some point in that story.
I do play the tuba. I promise I won't do it on this podcast. As you mentioned earlier, people who are making a run or doing something important while multitasking and listening might, have an accident. I don't want to do that, but I still play.
We'll have to feature you during our entertainment section at the next
Sure.
Get a tuba player on stage for you guys. But I love the story and the fact that your parents basically stole your dream and it set reality in for you as you said, went off to college. But my goodness, you've got quite the career, quite the experience in journalism and doing PR for Fortune 500 companies.
Yes.
And I know that law firms are complex and complicated, but where does the story go? Okay, I'm going to help you tease out your story. But is that like, okay, we get our story, we stick it on our about page and we're done? Or how does it get embedded in the day-to-day living, breathing machine of the law firm?
Well, it goes across every aspect of the firm. It's really critical, not only in gaining and retaining clients for the firm, but today attracting talent, attracting laterals, attracting folks who might be in another firm who would be a better fit at your firm. Your firm's story is critical to attracting them. I mean, there's a war for talent in the legal field these days. And most folks can move for more money, basically, when they want to. I mean, if we're in the Great Resignation or the Great Retention, I'm not really sure what it is. And certainly in the legal field, what we've seen is you don't have to come into the big downtown office anymore. You can work remotely. Some of the firms we work with are addressing their hiring considerations by finding small groups, small practice areas, maybe in smaller cities in the state in which they operate or in different geographies. So we now have new audiences that we can speak to on the hiring end as well as the client end. And that story is critically important. It's important when you're networking, doing introductions. If you go to an event and you practice a certain kind of law and you've got prospective clients there, how are they going to remember you? Let's remember, lawyers are all licensed. It's a table stake. You can't practice law unless you're licensed. And that's not a differentiator. Case citations, great. Letters behind your name, great. But for the listeners, unless you're working for a very sophisticated general counsel or inside counsel at a specific corporate client, how often do people say, man, I read your case citation. You really did a number in that case. Your brief was awesome. That's not really what they're hiring attorneys for. They're hiring them for their expertise, but the expertise needs to be communicated in a way that they understand. And that's a story.
So give me an example of a client's capital S story. Like
Sure.
what is I mean, you gave us your story, right? The tuba player but is that what we're talking about? Or is it their childhood memories? Like what is what does the story look like? And why is it so unique?
Great question. So our work draws a lot from the seminal thinking of people like Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst, and Joseph Campbell, the mythologist. And both of those gentlemen at different times, and actually Campbell at one point edited Carl Jung's papers, they recognized that regardless of time, culture, economic attainment, language, human beings, we all tell the same set of stories. And a great example is David and Goliath. If I say to you, Moshe, we got a new client, it's a David and Goliath story. Well, you don't have to be a biblical scholar to know that's the underdog story. So the first thing that's important is identifying an archetype or combination of archetypes like David and Goliath that describe your firm. And then you marry that with the specifics of the firm. And one of the things we see in marketing in the legal field is that if any attention is paid to the firm story, it goes right to what some people call the features and benefits, the bullet points. We have X number of people in this practice, more people in this practice certified to do A, B, and C than any other firm. Well, okay, that's all important and we'll get there. But first, again, table stake. Somebody's going to have a competition. Let's say a corporation. They'll bring in 3 finalists. They all have the same certifications, the same qualifications. Now what? The difference is the story, because what attorneys know, regardless of the nature of the case and the client engagement, stuff happens. And what the potential client is thinking is, what is the character and nature of this firm and the people in it? If stuff does hit the fan, are these the kind of people I want to work with? And so, to the beginning of your question, what's an example? We worked with a mid-sized law firm in a mid-Atlantic state last year through our process, which we call Storycrafting. And we identified an archetype we called legal pathfinder. So what's a legal pathfinder? A legal pathfinder is a firm that when the inside counsel or the C-suite, let's say the client company doesn't even have house counsel, inside counsel, they need a law firm. When they've come across a legal problem that they can't solve, and they don't want to step on the landmines from that particular kind of a case or litigation, they want somebody who's been there before. And that's what a legal pathfinder is. So in working with that firm, we've been helping them incorporate into their messaging everywhere. And yes, on their website is a critical area for that to appear, but there are many other places to insert this thinking that if you've got legal problems that you don't know how to handle because you don't have the expertise, we will be your legal pathfinder.
Yeah. So what does the construction of that story look like? So I understand. I mean that archetype.
Yep.
Figuring out what is the archetype is brilliant, and I know you don't need me to pat you on the back, but I love that because it simplifies the process, right? Because I'm either this, or this, right? It's got to be one of a certain selection of types that we're going to fit into. But then how do we take it from there to crafting an actual story that is interesting to somebody to listen to and gives them that message?
Absolutely. So the archetype is then married with the specifics of the firm. And these are things that folks in the firm are probably already talking about, but they don't have the context and the shape and the form to put that in a narrative format so that clients and potential clients or potential hires can understand it. And that's what you get from a fully teased out capital S story. We use a tool we call a message pyramid as one example. And early on in working with a firm, what we'll do is we'll identify the archetype, we'll align it with the specifics of the firm's expertise, what makes them different, and then we'll create an entire document that starts at the very top with a couple of sentences that cross the firm. This is who we are and what we do. And then we'll get deeper. I often think about it, like you're at a networking meeting or a cocktail party. Oh, what do you do? I work at this firm. What do you want people to say? Tell me more. Tell me more. So what the message pyramid is literally stood on its pointy tip, and the base of it is at the top. So you got the most broad, overreaching statement about the firm there. And then as you get deeper, you get into more specifics. It gives the story shape and structure. Sometimes we align it by the major practice areas. Sometimes we align it by other factors that might be important to the firm. And it pulls people into a deeper conversation. A well-constructed message pyramid becomes the roadmap to create your website content, to help you when you're creating thought leadership, journal articles about cases you've won, and also when you're creating business development materials to attract the right kinds of clients.
This is very, very interesting. And the one thing that immediately comes to mind is like, oh my gosh, if I don't do this first, then what am I going to do with everything I've created until now that now maybe isn't aligned properly, or is,
Right.
do we need, does setting on this journey mean that we have to start from scratch again?
No, it doesn't. And one of the good things that we've learned in the couple of decades that we've been doing this, there's wonderful raw material inside the firm that's already being used. It just needs some structure and purpose. The story is there. The firm that I described a few minutes ago, that's a legal pathfinder, they've been in business for 125 years in this city. That's an important factor. Now, just to go out there and say we've been in business for 125 years, as some of the attorneys were doing, doesn't really have the right context, right? But if somebody's a legal pathfinder and they've managed to avoid stepping on landmines for 125 years, okay, now we've got a story and a construct that makes the age of the firm really, really relevant.
Yeah, or they could say we've got 120 years of already stepping on them.
That's right. That's right.
We've already
we stepped on them, so you don't have to, right?
Right. We've gotten blown up before.
So this is very interesting, but it's also, as I'm asking you questions, it's more and more abstract, right? Mm-hmm. Like my job when I sit here behind the microphone is to try to anticipate what my listeners are thinking as they're listening to this, right? And it's, it makes sense what you're saying, but it also leaves me more confused about how I would go about this. Now, maybe that's the purpose, right? Maybe I can't do it myself and I need I need Paul and WordWrite to help me with it.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if there's something that we can do to kind of like, I don't know, maybe take us through an exercise to start formulating what this might look like when putting the theory into practice.
Right. Yes. So typically when we begin working with a firm, we'll get the leadership team together. Might be the executive committee and the leaders of some practices and people who might not be on the executive committee. And we'll put them in a room and we literally give them a handout. And we ask them to individually answer the question, why would somebody buy from you, work for you, invest in you, partner with you? They take a little bit of time to do that. And then together as a group, we talk about this. Now, what do we find out when we do that? We're not all telling the same story. And if the firm's large enough and they have somebody in charge of HR, and that's the person who's trying to find new associates or laterals, they're tasked with some aspect of that. Obviously, partners and practice leaders play a key role in that too. They might be telling a different story to try and attract folks than somebody else is sharing. The person who's running the real estate practice might be sharing a different aspect of the story than the person who's running the bankruptcy practice, right? So the thing is, a firm's story is like a diamond. Moshe, it's got different facets, right? So it's the same diamond, but what attracts prospective bankruptcy clients or litigation clients or laterals is a different facet of the diamond. So we use this exercise to get all the raw material out there What story are you sharing? What story are you sharing? And that becomes the bits and pieces, the foundational elements that we use to construct the overall story. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, it definitely leads us in the right direction. I
Okay.
like your diamond analogy, because then I guess when you don't have your story worked out, you're holding the diamond, but it's uncut, right? So
Right. Oh,
it's not attracting anybody.
You're holding a lump of coal or something. I don't know.
Exactly.
Yep.
So how does okay, so there's a process to kind of get this story tweaked out, which is a collaborative process that's,
Absolutely.
the various players in the firm are going to come together and each express what their understanding is, and then we take all those pieces and we kind of merge them together to create a story. Now, is there like in journalism or in
Yep.
storytelling, when it comes to like writing a movie or something like that, there's always like a special I don't even know, this is not my area of expertise, but
Mhm.
there's always a special format for the story that
Yes.
needs to have like a challenge, and then a
Yes.
where you nearly solve the problem, and then you have a new problem which makes it even
Yes.
worse than before, and now all of a sudden you have the climax, and then you have the and the hero solves the problem.
Right.
Is that what we're talking about when in developing this story? And if yes, then okay, now that we've got these various pieces of the puzzle
Mhm.
put together, where we've got all the inputs, how do we then take it and turn it into something that actually somebody wants to hear?
Yes. So what you describe in literature or in films, you'll have, let's just call it a problem, a challenge. And then there's what we call rising action or tension. And then the climax, and then what they call the resolution, right? There are a few other steps that could be added, but for purposes of the podcast episode, not really necessary to explain. So when you think about the firm and what the firm does, the kinds of clients you serve, you might have, again, a facet of the story for each kind of client you serve. And what you're doing is taking your unique story and applying it to that narrative and demonstrating how you can help them achieve the great outcome or resolution from working with the firm. And our process, which takes 30 to 90 days, depending upon the complexities of the firm, is how we help them uncover and develop this story. And then we help them go out and share it in a second phase. There are many subsidiary steps. We look at the firm's competitors. What story are they telling? Where are the gaps in the marketplace? What are the 5 burning questions? Every firm we've ever worked with, there's 5 burning questions. They're not always the same question, but sometimes they're similar. One of them might be, what's the best way to share your story? Where do you find your clients? Who else competes for your clients, right? And answering those questions helps us build that story you're talking about. What we do in the first phase of an engagement with the firm is they're going to wind up with a complete marketing plan that includes their story, the messaging they need, right? And a plan of action to go out and share that story. And frequently what happens is the firms come that far with us and we continue to work with them in some way, shape, or fashion. Now, some of the firms we've worked with, they have good internal marketing capabilities. Once they have the roadmap, if you will, from the story, they're able to take it from there, or else we're engaged to do that, or there's some combination.
Very interesting. So when the story gets created, are there different versions of it created for the different
Yes.
purposes? In other words,
Yes.
like, somebody who's, in the bankruptcy division might have the same story, but spun a different way, specifically to serve for them, and, and so on.
Yeah. So think about it. I always think about it, Moshe, like family dynamics, right? I'm one of 4 kids. All right. So one time when I was a kid, the 4 of us were in the living room together, and one of us, I won't say who, lamp. Mom and dad are in the other room. Mom and dad need to come in and they need to communicate. Now, the words they use and the story they tell for me at age 12 and my sister Sharon, who was the youngest at age 6, might be different. But you know what? Even a 6-year-old can call BS on a story that's not well shared. and that's not authentic, right? Now, our clients, the people that we want to hire at firms, they're not kids, but they have the same BS detector. So the story of a firm needs to roll up to a simple overarching narrative. And to your point, if I'm interested in the firm for something specific, I need a version of that story shared with me that's relevant to my needs, right? Now, attorneys inside firms of any size, what's one of the biggest issues that practice areas have? Cross-selling, getting people interested in other services that the firm might provide, right? That's why the overall narrative is important. And also, as you suggested, why the specific version of the narrative is appropriate for how somebody comes into the firm.
Now, are these stories origin stories? Or are they stories of past clients and how the firm has dealt with them? We're using the word story as a very broad, term, but just as an example, right? Why do I do what I do? Well, I'm on a mission to help people create generational wealth. And that's inspired by my grandfather. My grandfather came from Nazi Germany here to the US via Israel with just his father. He lost his mother and his twin siblings in the war.
Wow.
And he was 11 years old when he got here. He ended up becoming a business owner, followed in his father's footsteps, and had some success in diamond trade. And together with 4 of his cousins, purchased a piece of real estate in the west side of Manhattan, and owned an apartment building.
Wow.
And over time, that apartment building increased in value. I'm sure that he had many other fruitful financial investments, but that particular investment, as he got into his later years, he started to turn it into a co-op and started selling off individual units. And what he did with that money was he provided each of his 36 grandchildren with the down payment of their first home purchase.
Wow, that's great.
And I, as one of his grandchildren, was the recipient of that gift. And it made a massive difference to a young family just starting out to be able to start their journey, our financial journey, living in a home earlier than we would have ever been able to get into one, and also starting our own journey of wealth creation because of home ownership. And when I really sat down and thought about, like, what do I want to do in this world? It was, I want to help other people create that for their grandchildren. So that's part of my story, right? There's a lot of other pieces of my story and my journey of how I got to where I got. But that's like an origin story. But is that what we're talking about? Or are we, or am I completely off the mark?
No, that's a great example. An origin story is an example of a great capital S story. There are 5 or 10 that we see most commonly. So one might be the origin story. Another might be an invention or a development at a law firm of a specific kind of expertise. I think you and I and many of our listeners can think of firms where a particular partner or practice area in that firm, man, they figured out how to crack a certain kind of legal nut, and then a huge amount of business came their way. It might be that a firm has expertise in an area and the time is right. We've had this expertise for a few years and all of a sudden everybody's ready to litigate cybersecurity, and we're cybersecurity experts, right? So there could be a couple of examples right there. One thing I think is important to note, a firm can have chapters in its story just like we would find in a book, right? So a 125-year-old law firm, maybe it's appropriate sometimes to talk about the history of the firm, but maybe sometimes it's more appropriate to talk about where the firm is today. And that's fine. If great books didn't have chapters that took us through the course of the hero's journey, they wouldn't be worth reading, right? So it's the same for us in business and in firms. We need to be able to evolve the story as the firm grows.
This is so interesting and so complicated. It's like trying to wrap my head around the whole thing. Because I'm working right now with a video creator. I'm not really sure what the right terminology is, but I'm working with a professional to create a year's worth of video content. We're going to be doing a couple of days of recording. So we've been working on what does that content look like. And one of the things that she did was ask me, like, tell me about yourself, tell me about your story. And as I was sharing with her, she said, well, you have a lot of stories in your story, and we can tell each of them individually, and they each can serve a different purpose and a different time that's appropriate to share that story. And it all goes into the life experiences and why, and different data points of why I am who I am today, and why I'm able to help my clients in the way that I can, where other people maybe can't help in that way. And that's all boils down to the unique experiences that I have, which are best told in a story.
Oh, absolutely. Emotion. We on a daily basis as leaders, whether in a firm or in any business, we tell a lot of stories. So I completely understand where you're coming from. Our focus, this concept we developed called the capital S story, is basically this. There is one story that defines the character and nature of the firm. And then, as you suggested earlier, if leading a practice and I'm trying to attract a client, I may share a specific story. Now, that story might be about another client just like them that I helped, but it fits within the overall context of the capital S story, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody says, I'm intrigued by what you do at the firm and how you describe yourself, give me an example of somebody you've worked with just like me, then it would be appropriate to share that client story.
Everything that I do, there's different facets to it. Like, I'm a paramedic besides for what I do here, and I talk about my experiences there in different ways at different times, when they're, as appropriate. It makes its way into my coaching all the time. It makes its way into my podcast content all the time. But I might not even talk about the fact that I'm a paramedic when it comes to the story for my brand, because my brand is not based on that.
Right, exactly. And I think that's where part of the confusion may come in. Story is frankly a far too overused term. It's accurate, but it's like breathing. It's something we do every day, and a lot of times we don't think about it. And then when we start to focus on it, we can cause ourselves to get a little bit stressed out. And that's why we created this capital S term, because we're trying to help people understand, look, inside a firm, you may be sharing many stories on a very tactical level. I needed this brief done. I need this research done. I need you to do it because, right? You want to relate the task to the results, right? But this is something different. We're talking about a story that has some sense of permanence that describes the overall organization.
I love that. And now you wrote a book on this, right?
Yes.
So, and in the book, besides for describing what it is, do you actually, is somebody who reads the book expected to be able to actually construct their story from going through that book?
Yes, they will be able to begin the process of constructing their own story. And, some folks will be able to do it themselves, and some may have questions, and some may need to engage an external resource like us. And happy to chat with people who go down any one of those three paths. I have a couple chapters in the book where I basically open the hood and talk about the process we use and explain how to do it.
Now, I'm trying to figure out or navigate how the story fits into the overall marketing umbrella of the law firm, right?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like, and you call your company more like a PR agency. But when I engage a PR agency, does that negate or take away from all the other marketing efforts that I have? Or is it something that's an umbrella that goes on top of that? Or is it something that gets taken over by the PR agency? So I'm just trying to understand, let's say that I'm like, I love what Paul is saying. I think we need a story. We're going to go to WordWrite, and we're going to engage them, and we're going to have our story. And then we're going to do what? Are we then going to have WordWrite help us with all of our content from there? Or are we then going to take it back to our SEO company and our blog post writers and our podcast producers and our YouTube video creators and say, okay, this is now going to drive our content from here? Or is it something that WordWrite is now going to be our marketing arm?
That's a good question. And it can go either way. If a client of ours has a level of comfort and a relationship with a particular resource, one thing that a client said to me a few years ago, Paul, what I like about you guys is you play nice in the sandbox. And what that means is if a firm already has resources they're using, we're happy to collaborate with them. Now, what I would say about the PR aspect, we're not like a lot of PR firms. We started as a PR firm, but we practice what I would like to call the 21st century version of PR. And a woman that I know is a leader in the industry, Ginny Dietrich. She does the spinsucks.com blog. It's one of the top 5 marketing blogs in the world, and owns a firm called Armand Dietrich in Chicago. Came up with this term. She calls it peso. Sounds like the Mexican currency, but it's not. Stands for paid, earned, shared, and owned. And what that means is when we develop a story, we uncover and develop a firm's story, and we give them a marketing plan, we are advising them on what mix of paid digital, earned, which is more like traditional PR, shared, which is social media essentially, and owned, which is your thought capital, is the right mix to share that story, right? And it's never all 100 in one bucket or 25, 25, 25, 25. There's some unique mix for the firm that's going to be right for them based upon what kind of work they're trying to attract and what kind of folks are driving that work, right? Or if it's talent, the talent, right? How are you going to reach the right people in the right place at the right time with the right facet of your story?
Very, very interesting. And what's really enlightening to me hearing you share this is that there's a lot more to it than meets the eye, right? Like it's not just a story. It's not just PR. It's, there's actually like a whole logic behind this and calculation and now strategy that needs to be implemented once that story is created. And we're not going to have enough time to cover all that on the podcast, but
right.
Just understanding what goes into it and the level of complexity. Now, one thing that, I don't want to put you on the spot because I know that, you just said you play nice in the sandbox, which means that there's so many different things that you have and offer. But yeah, there are listeners who are like, this sounds expensive. Is it really something that I can invest in at my current stage? And I know that we in the green room had a conversation about who's your ideal client, what is the right size firm, for you. There's going to be a certain percentage of our audience that's just too small for you. Yes. And where do they go for help? And where, and how should somebody, like, if they're sitting there listening to this saying, should I even waste his time? Should I give them a call? Should I send them an email? Whatever you're going to share at the end of how somebody can get in touch with you. Who should take the next step and who shouldn't, and what should somebody do if they're just not ready?
Those are all great questions. Moshe, here's one of the reasons I wrote the book was for people who might not be able to engage in the process. Certainly, I also wrote the book for other reasons, right? I want to get our thought capital as a firm out there and spread the message, right? But the book is an inexpensive investment. We also provide, and we'll provide a link here at the end of the episode, a lot of free content. I'm always happy to chat with somebody. If you've read the book and have a basic understanding, you will be able to go to what resources might be appropriate for your firm if you're smaller, and you'll be able to explain to them what you're looking for, and you'll be able to have a different conversation. Look, firms are run by committees of partners, generally speaking. Marketing is often looked upon not as an investment, but as an expense. I get that. To me, it's an investment to help grow the firm. Not everybody looks at it that way. It does cost money, right? And the saddest thing to me is that without having a story, you can waste a hell of a lot of money on marketing stuff and not get any results. That's one of the main reasons why we put together our process and why I'm on this mission and why I'm passionate about uncovering, developing, and then sharing the firm's capital S story. You know, you can buy Facebook ads, you can buy LinkedIn ads, you can make videos, and you can spend 5, 10, 15, 20, 50, $80,000 on stuff like that and have a lot of interesting discussions with your partners about the wisdom of doing these kinds of things, right?
Yep.
And if you don't get any results, boy, does that hurt, right? So it's fair to think of what we're talking about today, uncovering and developing your story, is creating a roadmap. If you and I were going to go to California, we wouldn't just jump in the car, not check how much gas we have, not figure out where we're going or how long it's going to take. Yet, unfortunately, far too often, because of the razzle dazzle, whiz bang stuff that's associated with marketing, I see far too many firms just lay out cash to invest in some marketing initiative when they're not really sure what story they're sharing, not really sure what the ROI is going to be. And then they're ultimately disappointed. And they say for the 25th time, see, I told you marketing didn't work.
Right. Yeah, it's very true. And it's, I don't know if the reason that their marketing is not working is exclusively because they're not clear about their story. I think there's probably a lot more to it. Like they don't know who they're talking to either.
Yes.
You know,
That is
so
so
they're showing up in the wrong places in the wrong way to get their attention. And so, you know, you've got to be in the right place, in the right audience, the right modality to even start the conversation. And then you get a chance to tell your story and have it be heard and accepted, and people can be attracted to it and take action on it. But it's a very interesting concept to really get this story out and clear before you really start investing significant dollars into marketing campaigns, so that you have the right message in place and you have the right thing going on. As a matter of fact, I have this inspirational moment to give away some copies of your book. So earlier at the beginning of the episode, I mentioned that we have our coaches. We offer a free coaching session for people. So what I'm going to do is when this gets released, folks, the first 8 weeks after this episode gets released, anybody who books a free coaching call with my coaches will be gifted. We will ship it to you. We'll gift you a copy of Finding Your Capital S Story, Why Your Story Drives Your Brand. And I have to remember when we're done recording to message my team on Slack and tell them I made this promotion, because often I forget to tell them and then they yell at me. But I would love to put a copy of this book in your hand, because I'm drinking from the Kool-Aid here, Paul. I mean, I'm buying what you're dishing. It makes so much sense to me. And there has to be a way for us to differentiate ourselves from the competition and to be able to relay that to our potential clients and our clients. And not just that, like our networking conversations and when we're shaking hands, like, what do you do? You know, it's so much better than, oh, I'm an attorney, right? Like,
yes.
And, you know, when people ask me what I do, I don't tell them I'm a coach. I tell them that I help successful lawyers create generational wealth. You know, like that's the beginning of my story. That's, you know, it's oh, really? What's generational wealth? Why, you know, how does that work? And that really just leads to more questions. So I could totally see how this makes a ton of sense. And I can't wait. I'm going to dive into the book myself. Never heard of it, but I'm going to dive into it. And we also have a book club. So Mimi on our team runs the Reader's Nook. Folks, if you don't know about that, you can go to profitwithlaw.com/book club. It's absolutely free to join. But if this book makes the cut, you know, we'll definitely put it onto the reading list for the book club. But I really love all the concepts that you shared today, Paul. And to me, when I'm sitting here behind the microphone, I always want to just like, okay, so tell us, what do we have to do? What's the, I want to go from concept to reality. Like, how do we put this into motion? And I don't think I was able to get that for my listeners today, except for go read the book and call Paul, right? Like that, those are the next steps you have to take. But I really, it makes a lot of sense. The concept of getting the story refined and defined to really tell somebody why they should work with this firm, why this firm is going to be able to do what they want it to do, in a way that captivates them and interests them, and also at the same time sets you apart from anybody else who they're meeting with.
Exactly. Well, Moshe, it's very kind of you to make that offer to those who sign up for your free coaching. And no, I hope the book makes the cut for the book club. That would be great. I would like to get to the level in a podcast interview to take everything apart and explain to people exactly how to do this. What we do is both very simple, but also very strategic. And it's that strategic part that you're seeing as being complex. When I was a kid and I worked with my dad on woodworking projects, he would always say, measure twice and cut once, right? And that's what we've got here. What we've got is we've got to be looking more than once, measuring a number of things before we start cutting. And what I was saying earlier about firms feeling like they're wasting their money on marketing, and this is not a criticism of them because it's a conventional wisdom. Oh, I see this firm's on LinkedIn. I guess we better be on LinkedIn, right? But if you don't really have your story together and your strategy prepared, you may not get the kind of results that you want. And that's what we focus on.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Paul, we had so much fun here behind the microphone. We're just about out of time. When we go into closing a show, I ask my guests to leave one parting piece of wisdom, like the number one piece of advice that you want to leave with our listeners. And then the next thing is how do they get in touch with you? How do they, if they were listening to this and like, I've got to have a conversation with Paul, what is the next step they can take to get in touch with you, with WordWrite? Just let us know, how do they get started with interacting with your brand?
So the one piece of advice I'd have is don't be deterred by what you may think your story should look like. There's this quote, I'm not sure who said it. Passion trumps polish every time. And most of the great attorneys that I've met are driven by a passion for some aspect of the law. I don't know why, maybe it's all the lawyer jokes out there, but there's a certain reticence to demonstrate that passion. And if you're passionate about why you do what you do, if you're passionate about why you get up every day and you practice the law, you are going to be so much farther ahead in terms of sharing your authentic story than so many of your peers. And that would be my bit of advice. In terms of contacting us, the best way to do that, word like we speak, write like what we do with a pen, PR, wordwritepr.com/storycrafting. That'll take the listeners, the audience, to a landing page where they'll be able to reach out and contact us if they want. They'll be able to download a free chapter of the book if they're not ready to buy the book. And there will be links there to many other resources that talk about our thinking on the capital S story concept.
Awesome. Well, folks, we'll link up the link to that in the show notes. We'll also provide a link to the book on Amazon. You can easily click it right from your phone or your device that you're using, and go ahead and make the purchase of that book to get started. Or you could just get in touch with WordWrite and their team and have a conversation with them directly. This has been a really great conversation. I love that your parting piece of advice for our listeners was about passion. And I think that the flip side of what you shared is that the passion also, the story then fuels the passion, because
Absolutely.
the story is created from the passion, but then we tend to forget why we're doing what we're doing. We go through the day to day and we lose sight of what we're really doing, and we go through the motions and we lose the excitement and we lose the passion. And if we're constantly talking about the story, we're reigniting the passion. And I think that it brings us full circle to stay in tune with that on a regular basis. And I love that. I love that concept. And because I need to consciously remind myself why I'm doing what I'm doing sometimes, because I'm in the grind, right? Like it's not always the most fun thing in the world running your business, but sometimes you have to go through some of that stuff in order to accomplish your goals. But you got to remember why you have those goals. You've got to remember what's the journey you set out on. And that by defining your story and talking about it all the time, you're constantly not just telling people about it, but you're reminding yourself, why you're doing what you're doing and reigniting that passion. So I love that.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be on with you today and to visit with your audience. It's been great.
You're very welcome, Paul. And thank you very much for being so generous with your time. Really appreciate you being here. Folks, if you enjoyed this episode and this is your first time listening to the Profit with Law podcast, you probably haven't hit the subscribe button yet, but we want you to hit it. Why? Because we have amazing interviews like this every single week, and we want to make sure that you're not missing any of them. This way, your podcast player will give you a little alert letting you know a new episode is out. We have a new interview every Thursday, and every once in a while, I'll pepper in a solo episode on Tuesdays and share something with you. And I used to do it more consistently. There's a lot going on right now. I recently broke my foot and I'm down for the count. And Paul had no idea, but I'm sitting here on a stool and I've got my foot up on a chair. It's been quite the day. So we batched podcast episodes today, and at this point I'm ready to rip my leg off, but it's okay. People, I like sharing stuff like this because now you can picture what I just did today all day for you guys listening to the podcast. So hit the subscribe button. I mean, if I could do this, you could press subscribe. Anyway, we love having you here. A rating and review would also go really well for us. If you go into your podcast player, leave us a rating and review. We'd appreciate it. But most importantly, if there's one thing that I can ask you to do for me, for bringing this amazing episode to you and having Paul on here, tell a friend. If each of you really like this episode, each of you tells another attorney, another law firm owner, somebody that you are in contact with, you tell them about the episode, that will go the furthest for in spreading the word and helping other people achieve success as well. So spread the love, let them know about the Profit with Law podcast and this particular episode with Paul. It was a really great conversation. Loved having it. And folks, we'll see you next week. Take care. Have you been enjoying the show? We sure hope so. To make sure you never miss an episode, be sure to hit the subscribe button in your podcast player app. Next week, we will be back with more valuable resources and ideas on how to break the mold and take your law firm to the next level.